if Taylor Swift can take down the government and the NFL, I think I could win for best looking whatever in this market.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
That's my
best
theory.
Best looking political reporter. TV division.
Best looking political reporter that has a show on at 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon. It's a niche category.
Yeah. But a trophy's a trophy, man.
I'm Arizona Family political editor Dennis Welch.
Dennis, fake news Welch. Try to tell the truth.
And this is the Politics Unplugged podcast.
Dennis, if you have a problem with substance abuse, I am more than willing to talk to you anytime you need.
All right, and welcome back to this week's edition of Politics Unplugged, the podcast edition of that. And this week we have Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates with us today. I had him on the show just a couple of weeks ago talking about what I think he might say is the biggest election issue in Arizona that really not a lot of people are paying that much attention to. And this has to do with the schedules of scheduling the election. And basically, county leaders, election officials are asking for more time to process and count the votes because there's a law that was passed a couple years ago that could trigger a lot more recounts, which could slow the system down. And if that happens, military overseas voters could be disenfranchised in the presidential election. In the worst case scenario, Arizona voters and Arizona's electoral college votes may not be counted in the presidential election. That sounds fantastical, like just unbelievable at this point. But Mr. Gates, this is real, you say, and there is a real deadline coming up in about a week. The clock is ticking, correct?
Yeah. In fact, Dennis, can you just go down to the governor and legislature? You just summarized that so well. That is absolutely the issue that we're facing, and we have made our friends at the legislature and the governor aware of this for months and months. Mm-hmm. And it's not like we just raised this. As you know, as you mentioned, I was on your show a few weeks ago, but we've had over 60 meetings that started last year, and now we are absolutely up against the wall. Mm-hmm. Next Friday, February 9th, is the drop dead date to get a fix. But that's the good news. Mm-hmm. It's not too late.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. But, I got to say, I want to know what the holdup is, because I got the press release about this warning, solution cannot wait. And it says here, you guys are you and other folks from the counties and election officials, quote, call for state leaders to put aside partisan politics and pass a clean bill. When I see clean bill, that tells me that something else is going on at the legislature, that lawmakers are trying to add things to the bill that you think is, bogging it down, mucking it up. What's going on?
Yeah. So the good news is everyone acknowledges this is a real issue.
Yeah.
So that's not where we're at. We are dealing with, unfortunately, politics. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is creeping into this. And some of the folks involved in the process, key figures in it, have certain issues that they want to get addressed and make this part of some kind of omnibus election bill. And one, we don't have time. And two, the voters deserve a lot better than that. This is a technical problem. This has nothing to do with whether or not you think Maricopa County or the other 14 counties in the state run safe and secure elections. This is simply getting the calendar straightened out because of a change in law that occurred in 2022. So what we have been asking, really pleading with the leaders of the legislature and the governor is, let's set aside these other issues with elections. You guys can, you guys go work on that at some other time. But on this, we need the calendar fixed. And that's what we're looking for. And the good news is also more good news. We're very close. Mm-hmm. We're very close. That's good because the deadline is upcoming. But we're very close. But we need people to set aside their particular pet issues and get the fix. We have said from the beginning that we were open to any solutions. It got us 19 days for the primary and 17 days for the general. We presented a solution. And key to that solution are two things in particular. One, the primary must move up a week.
And real quick, you want an extra 19 days after the primary, before in between that the end of the primary and the general election, to deal with the anticipated potential recounts. Yeah. Because you have to get ballots out to overseas voters legally by 45 days before the election, or they could be disenfranchised. And then 17 days after the general election to deal with anticipated recounts, because you have to certify the election, certify the electors, because technically voters don't directly vote for the president. They vote a set of electors who then go and cast Arizona's electoral votes for Arizona. So they need that time. So it's 19 days after the primary, 17 days after the general. Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt.
That is absolutely correct, and I think it's important that your listeners understand we're not asking for this for the people who run elections. It's not about us. This is for the voters, because as you pointed out, if these fixes if they don't occur, then overseas service members will not get their ballots on time by September 21st, which is when they are entitled to them under federal law. And also we risk Arizona's votes not counting in the presidential election if we don't have all this wrapped up by December 11th, which under new law is the firm safe harbor date. So we got to have them done by those 2 days.
So why the deadline next week? I mean, I've been down to the legislature for a long time. A couple of examples. Every year the legislature is statutorily supposed to go 100 days. It always goes more than 100 days. Budgets are supposed to be done by July 1st. Well, we've blown through that deadline in the past. Why is this a real hard and fast deadline? And if it is, explain why.
Yeah. So as opposed to the deadlines that you just mentioned, which are important, but these are absolute hard deadlines because stuff has to get done. And this is what has to get done. We are here asking for the primary date to move up. We don't just snap our fingers and say, okay, now the primary is on July 30th. We've been negotiating for months with all the different sites, right? Voting sites. We're going to have over 200 voting sites for the primary and the general election vote centers. So now we've got to go and renegotiate those. So that takes a lot of time. We're already too late, okay? That's why we're saying February 9th is the absolute drop dead date. Then all the different materials, right? Those that have certain dates in them, the voters' pamphlets, all this, we are up against the wall. So this is a hard deadline because these are real things that have to get done. But and remember, this is not just a Maricopa County issue. Yeah. These 19 dates, the 19 days and the 17 days, that's based upon when we look at the totality of all 15 counties across this state. All 15 counties have come to the agreement that we've got to have the 19 days or the 17 days. And if we don't, those unfortunate things that we talked about are going to very likely occur. If there's a recount at all, and we now know in the November 2022 general election, that was the first time under the new law, we had 3 automatic recounts statewide.
Yeah, and Arizona historically takes a long time to count the votes. Again, it's worth noting that in the past, most of these statewide big elections in Arizona were won by a much wider margins. They were called by, the Associated Press and other folks pretty quickly. But it was still always taking 2 weeks to finish up the count of the vote. But now with the slimmer margins, stuff like that, it seems like, the country waits on Arizona in presidential election years. But I want to go back, and you said a lot of stuff needs to happen. Just unpack that just a little bit, since this is a podcast, we're allowed to go a little bit more in the weeds here. And love that. Love getting in the weeds with this stuff. Explain, because we've learned so much about elections over the past several years, how much detail goes into that. To move the primary date is one way to get a few extra days on this. There's some other stuff that you wanted, some other, measures you want to take dealing with the curing process and stuff. But why does this, February deadline, what needs to start happen as soon as this bill is passed, if it hits and makes that deadline?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, these vote centers at Maricopa County and then polling places in those counties that don't have vote centers. You've got, right, we've agreed, hey, Dennis, I can have a party at your house on August 6th.
Let's do it.
You agreed to that,
Let's do
right?
it.
Now, do I just assume that I'm going to be able to have a party at your house on July 30th? No, I need to call, because maybe July 30th doesn't work for you, but August 6th doesn't. And so we're talking, unfortunately, we have a lot of challenges in getting schools, churches, other facilities to agree to have people voting there.
Yeah. So you've got to get everything lined up
We've got to get all this lined up, because if we don't have those, especially in those counties where they have precinct voting, right? You've got to have even more locations there, right? So that is so vitally important. The other thing too is this will also make changes on the candidate side. Mm-hmm. So the candidate filing deadlines are going to move. We've got to let people know about that. There's documentation that's got to be changed on the statewide level. I mean, so this has a cascade effect. Okay. We're not making this request lightly. Mm-hmm. We know this is a big ask, but as you outlined so well, there are big ramifications if we don't get these changes. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the impact on the voter, you think about, let's say, for example, there are people who aren't on the early voting list now, right? So they vote in person, and they were going to vote on August 6th, but July 30th, they're going to be, out of town. So they got to get on the list. I mean, we can't it's not just that we have to make these changes in our processes. We need to start educating folks immediately about that as well. So there's so many different pieces to this. That's why this isn't a fake deadline. We can't just say, oh, well, let's just see if it looks like we're going to have a recount, right? That's not how this works. We've got to start doing this now. The whole timeline is going to change, but we can still do it. But, if 2 counties can't make the new deadline, this doesn't work, right? Mm-hmm. We know that for all 15 counties, this works. February 9th works, and that's the end. That's the end of the timeline.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to what's happening at the legislature, what might be holding up. We know that people in the legislature subscribe to the conspiracy theory that elections are rigged. You know that intimately. I would encourage anybody, if you're not familiar with Mr. Gates' story, go back, Google it. It's long, it's detailed, and whatnot. Is that some of what is holding this up? That people who do not trust, without proof that that the elections are rigged here, that they're wanting some of their asks. Is that part of what is holding this up? Because, like you said, everybody's in agreement with this, but we can't but they can't find an agreement.
Yeah. I think that, there are some people in the legislature who have those positions. Quite frankly, I've been very pleased to see legislative leadership step up, and they're ready to move. And we need the governor to do the same thing. We need her to lead on this. She's a former Secretary of State. She understands. She trusts the counties. She knows that when we ask for this time, we need this time. Mm-hmm. So we need her leadership. Takes 2 to tango. It takes the legislature and the governor's
Sounds
office.
like maybe you're saying that you're putting more of the onus on the governor than the legislature.
I appreciate that. I think both of them have come to the table in good faith. But right now, let me put it this way. If the legislature introduces a bill on Monday, the governor needs to be ready. If it does what this does, she needs to be ready to sign it. Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that she trusts us. She knows that the county officials know how to do it, but we need her leadership right now. There's only one governor. Mm-hmm. There's only one person up on that 9th floor. So I wouldn't necessarily point fingers at one particular body here or one person. We need that leadership from the governor as well.
So what does that entail? Like, let's call it, you want to call a press conference, use the bully pulpit, like special, like what's the leadership?
Well, I think this has been clarified, mm-hmm. but there was, there was a statement that she made earlier in the week that she said it was too late for the primary to move. I don't think she believes that. I think she may have
Misspoke.
Yeah, may have misspoke. But we need clarity on that. If she wants to, again, I've never served in the legislature. I'm not an expert on how things work out there. I don't know if she needs to call a special session or what needs to happen, but we need a bill introduced and signed next week.
And let me ask you too, and to circle back a little bit, given your personal experience dealing with, so-called election deniers, how have you been received down at the legislature? Because, unfairly, people like Rusty Bowers, the entire board were like the face of this stuff. How are you received down at the Capitol as a whole?
So I would say there are certainly people at the Capitol who are not don't want to work constructively with the board. They want to score cheap political points at the expense of the board, at the expense of our elections workers. But I would say that's the minority. And I have had excellent conversations with legislative leadership over the past couple of years on important issues, on elections, but then on other issues as well. Senator Peterson invited me out to discuss making sure that our prosecutors, we have the funding we need to employ prosecutors. So I appreciate that. So I would say, that there's a lot of strong working relationships this board has with the legislature and with the governor's office and with other statewide elected officials. So, look, all of us have a job to do. We're there to represent our constituents, and if there are things that were tough that we've all dealt with, we have to put that in the back seat, right? And we have to focus on what's best for our constituents, and that's why we are trying to work with literally every member of the legislature and the governor's office to get this important issue done, because it's about the voters. It's not about us. It's about the voters and having their votes count this year.
And let's wrap up with this. You've been involved in politics for a long time. So if you were setting the betting line, the DraftKings of politics.
This sounds like a bad idea.
Probably very illegal. But let's say, what are the odds of getting a bill next week out in this passing from your point of view right now?
So I'll probably get in trouble for setting, the odds. And of course, these are subject to change, right? I would say I'd put it at 2-1.
Okay.
I think the governor and the legislature are going to do the right thing. We're going to get this done. And then we're going to get to work doing all the things that we've walked through that now the 15 counties have to do. And we're happy to do it because we are voter focused, right? That is our job. And by making these changes, we can make sure that the voters have the best experience possible while, in the end, the most important thing, that all their votes count.
All right. I want to thank you very much for talking about this topic. You're welcome back anytime. You got an open invitation, but it's somewhat quasi-tradition here. I want to end with a final question for you, completely unrelated to anything dealing with this.
Yes.
Are you a fan of Taylor Swift and her music?
I'm certainly not involved in the political stuff. I think she's talented, but is she my favorite artist? No. But I think there's support for Taylor Swift in the Gates household. We'll put it that way. I do have three daughters, right?
But you don't view her as public enemy number one.
Absolutely.
Because there are some people out there.
Actually, what's of more impact to me has been her boyfriend, who was on several of my fantasy football teams.
There you go.
And led to a lot of success for me. So I've got no hate for that.
Hey, man, the only bad thing I can say about Travis Kelce is not one of those great tight ends from the University of Iowa.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome back to the other side of the Politics Unplugged podcast edition. As always, joined by Colin here. Say hi to everybody, Colin.
Hi. Proud to be the backside of the podcast.
Oh, we've had too much fun. It has been a weird week in Arizona politics. Good Lord, has it been a weird week.
There are plenty of weeks where we're trying to figure out what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's
when we
like
get to the TV show and the pod. This was not one of those weeks.
No, it's like
material.
what can't we get to? What do we have to edit out? And as much as I'm interested in every race dealing with campaign finance, and that was one of the big stories. I mean, maybe not that's one of the big hard news stories of the week. It's certainly nowhere near the closest to the craziest stories, and we'll get to some of that here in a second. But you your thoughts on this week in camp? It was the first. It was for the last quarter of last year. We're starting to get a sense of how these races are starting to shape up, particularly with the U.S. Senate race. You've seen the discussions now on the TV side. You've read, done a little bit of reporting on some of the top line issues in these races. What's your big takeaway so far and what's the big race you're looking at here?
I mean, the number one interesting thing for me, and I'm guessing a lot of people fall into this, is I'm trying to figure out who's actually running for Senate and if Sinema's in or not.
Yeah.
And this was maybe our first chance to get a real good indication of, do we think she's in or do we think she's out? And the result seems to be sort of she's not really acting like someone who's in, but she also has enough money sitting around that if she decides to act like someone who's in, she can get there pretty quickly.
Yeah, as friend of the pod in the TV show, Barrett Marson says, money can cure a lot of problems, and that's really true in this situation. She is, though. I think we remind everybody, Sinema is facing a deadline 2 months away. She's got to collect tens of thousands. I think it's around between 50,000 signatures from registered voters on petitions to qualify, secure a place on the ballot. That's coming up, and we don't know. There's no indication she started that process or doing that process right now. We do know that Kyrsten Sinema likes the focus that she's working for people of Arizona. That's her focus. Right. She does have a long list of accomplishments and bipartisan bills and whatnot. The latest one being this bipartisan immigration border security bill. It's linked to funding with Ukraine. Latest reports I'm seeing is it could, this is dead on arrival in the House.
Exactly.
It may have trouble even getting out of the Senate, but I'm tired of predicting what's going on out there because I'm frequently wrong when this kinds of stuff. But from what I saw in those campaign finance reports, it does. It's not exactly looking like a candidate gearing up to wage a re-election campaign.
No.
I have thought for a while that she's probably not going to run unless her polling numbers change, unless there is something out there to entice her. Because I don't know if she wants to run, a campaign where she may likely lose.
Exactly. And if she's hoping for a bump from her work on immigration, which maybe she's hoping that it passes and everyone's happy and she gets to say that was mine.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big, dude, look, and it's a big accomplishment.
Oh, it would be a big accomplishment.
And look, it's just someone saying this for me, like, look, the Sinema team's not exactly our biggest fans.
No.
That's a big accomplishment if she could get that done. But
it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
No, and big reason why is because, Donald Trump is waiting before before the text has even been produced, before anybody has seen the details of this bill.
Whatever this is, it's bad.
Yeah, whatever it is bad. And, it's just, the cynicism of the whole thing. This is like, sometimes I feel like doing a podcast, we're on a radio show. Yeah. And I just wish we had a call in right now. Like, what do you feel? What does this say to you that it seems like the top presidential candidate for the Republican Party doesn't want to solve this issue because he wants to keep it for his political benefit?
Right.
I would love to know what, random folks think about that.
And it's something people get accused of all the time. It's certainly not the first time anyone has suggested that the parties keep kicking immigration down the road because they don't particularly want to deal with it and they want to blame the other side. Mm-hmm. You heard that a lot. It's never been quite as blatant as it is now. The presidential candidate saying, you guys better not do that because I want to get some mileage out of this. I
know. The other thing to point out, too, the $10.5 million that Kyrsten Sinema has on hand, she had a very lackluster fundraising performance for a Senate race. It was 500, nearly 600,000. What was it? I got checks notes, $594,000 for the final 3 months of last year. That is really, really lackluster compared to what we've seen Kirsten Sinema run in the past. But the big number is that $10.5 million, 10.5 or 10.6 that she still has on hand. That is a tremendous amount of money. In fact, it is more money than all of her potential challengers have on hand put together, and by a significant amount. I mean, Carrie Lake she raised $2.1 million, spent $1 million, has $1 million on hand. She also accrued $308,000 in debt and unpaid bills and whatnot. Ruben Gallego raised in the final quarter $3.3 million. It was $3.3 million. He has 6.5 cash on hand. So and Mark Lamb is just he's struggling to keep pace. Was a very popular Pinell County sheriff. But, in a Senate race, you need 7 figures.
Yeah.
8 figures in some cases, and he's struggling to raise in the low 6 figures, around $200,000 that he read. So if you add up all the cash on hand between those 3 candidates, that doesn't even come close to what Kirsten has on her own.
Right.
Senator Sinema has on her own. So that says a lot.
Yes. And again, she's someone who doesn't seem to be waging a campaign, but if she decides she's in, with that kind of money, you can get up to speed.
Yeah, and she's just keeping us guessing, and we'll have to keep guessing until that deadline comes and goes. But it's going to come up around sooner than later. We should be hearing something here, and I would imagine after this immigration drama plays out, and it goes in, whether it passes or not, which again, it just really does look in jeopardy. I mean, it could struggle to get out of the Senate, and if the House Speaker doesn't want to hear the bill. Pronouncing it dead on arrival. I mean, it may not even get a vote. Who knows? Because speakerships, that kind of stuff, very powerful. They can control the agendas there.
Yeah.
Also, there's a couple of big races. In CD6, and was it CD6 and CD1? Those are the 2 congressional races that are swing districts in the general election. Again, those are really important races to watch because they are represented right now in CD1 by David Schweikert, a Republican. In CD6, it's by Republican Juan Ciscomani. And they were won by President Joe Biden back in 2020. So these are some real swing districts.
Yeah.
And side note, Juan Ciscomani is like my favorite name to pronounce in politics.
It's a fun name to say.
Juan Ciscomani.
Yeah.
Just say it. It's great. It rolls off the tongue.
Yes, it does.
It's great. But like Schweikert, looks like he did not compete as well as some of the Democrats running to try to challenge him in the general election. I mean, in that race, Andre Cherney, who has some problems of his own in his business side right now. I believe he's being investigated. He raised about $413,000. And Connor O'Callaghan raised $304,000. Now Cherney has about $50,000 cash on hand. Callahan has about $1 million cash on hand. Schweikert has about $902,000 cash on hand on that. It seems to me Schweikert's going to need a lot of money in this race. I mean, he campaigns very hard.
Yeah.
I've seen this over and over for years. He is a tough campaigner. He knows how to win elections. But again, he's been in office for such a long time, and these ethics complaints have been there now for a while. It would seem that he's going to need some money to secure that seat. And, who knows? We'll see what happens down there. And in CD6...
The thing about Schweikert, too, is it seems like every election, that's the one where everyone's saying, oh, that's a vulnerable seat. He's vulnerable. And then he wins it.
Every year, every 2 years, it's, we can take him out this time. This time we're taking him out. And, he's, David Schweikert is a really fanatical campaigner.
Yeah.
Everything I've heard. I mean, he puts his life into it. And, but he's been there for a while. The controversy has swirled around him. Does it take a toll this time around? Let's see,
We'll see.
CD6 Siskamani, again, great name to say.
Yeah.
I encourage everybody to say it. 478,000 raised, 2.1 million cash on hand. Kristen Engel, $464,000 raised. Well, that's kind of on pace with the incumbent, Juan Siskamani, and she has about $915,000 cash on hand. So she's doing very well down there. And this is a real swing district. This is a district that has gone Democrat and Republican, flipped red and blue several times in the past, few years.
Yeah.
So, I'll be watching that, and those numbers really stood out to me, on that one. And then, it looks like in one key primary, it's the race to replace Ruben Gallego, who is trying to, win the Senate seat.
Yeah.
Wow, it just looks like Raquel Tehran is having a bit of a time struggling to keep up with the fundraising. She, raised about just over $200,000. Yasmin Ansari, she raised over $300,000, $312,000, and has $745,000 cash on hand, which is a little over $100,000 more than what Raquel has in that district. So that'll be,
which is a very, very blue district.
It's a very blue district. Whoever wins this primary is likely going to be the congressperson representing that district, and probably the person who represents that district for as long as they want to.
Yeah.
Gallego would still represent that district had he not chose to run for Senate for as long until they started naming post offices and schools after him.
Yes. Until he became Ed Pastor and everything in his district's named after him.
Yeah, well, so enough with the news. God, let's talk about the real news of this past week. Yeah. And something you and I have had fun observing is the meltdown over Taylor Swift kissing Travis Kelce and the conspiracies that it has spawned. Somehow CIA psyop. Somehow Taylor Swift. This has been interesting. Like, you've got this anger on the sports side and on the politics side, but taken together, Taylor Swift is going to take down the government and B, the NFL.
Yes. The NFL, where Tony Dungy was on record saying that he thinks it's been very bad for the NFL and it's really turning people off.
What?
Before the game that set records for viewership.
It's absurd. It's absurd.
Tony Dungy. God, I hate Tony Dungy. Yeah, and then the whole. The core of what I don't understand is why do Republicans want to run against Taylor Swift instead of running against Joe Biden? Take your shots at Joe Biden. Taylor Swift might be the most popular person in this country. I don't know why you want to run against her.
No, man. Dude, her concerts just grossed over $1 billion. Her Eras tour, $1 billion.
Yes. People love Taylor Swift. I'm not a Taylor Swift music person, and I like Taylor Swift.
Yeah. I'm not, a good friend of mine, very smart guy. He's just like, why do people want to get upset about things that aren't made for them?
Yeah.
I mean, Taylor Swift music is not made for me.
Yeah.
I take it or leave it, whatever. And it doesn't bother me that they show Taylor Swift at Chiefs games. No. Yet fans get all worked up about that, and now it's spilled over into the political arena, and I don't understand it. Why would you pick a fight with her? There was a little behind the scenes here. We get crazy amounts of weird press releases, right?
Yeah.
Both you and I.
Yeah.
And one of them we got this morning. We tape on Fridays. We got somebody claims that they crunched the data and did the top 10 most in demand or popular concerts in Arizona, top acts. And Taylor Swift was far and away number one.
Yeah.
And maybe we can go over this next week because we love bashing on lists, but it's a travesty of justice at the Blink 182 outfit. There was more demand for that than the boss, Bruce Springsteen. Yeah. Look, it's no accounting for taste. I can't, you can't legislate that. But apparently, the Taylor Swift thing, why would you take on somebody who's that popular she can maybe move numbers.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that someone went back and looked at how much airtime she was actually getting during these games.
It's like 20 seconds.
I think the average was 25. Oof. Come on, man. Oof. You can't handle that? Oof. And worth noting, Eminem got plenty of airtime in the last Lions game. No one cared.
No.
No one's raising a pitchfork because a dude got on air.
No. And he's like flipping people off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that was on air, but there were pictures of him.
It was on air, but
there were pictures of him flipping people off.
Yeah.
Nobody's upset about that, but like some woman shows up to support her boyfriend
and is happy when he scores
and is really
and
that's a crime or something.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I mean, when you lose like that, Colin Cowherd, this big sportscaster, somewhat of a brain donkey from time to time.
Yes.
But when he goes off and says, like, why are you people getting so worked up about it? I mean, like, I think you're losing perspective here.
Yeah. I mean, Pat McAfee did the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, big dumbass bro in a sleeveless T-shirt who yells about sports is saying, man, why do you care about Taylor Swift?
Yeah. And it was an interesting point I heard, and it may have been on the Coward show. He challenged people who say, well, I just want football. I don't want all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And he says, no.
That's not true.
Like when you take a stopwatch and you time just the football play, because the clock runs when you're calling the plays, you got 40 seconds in between plays. Not counting out just the football portion, it's like 18 to 20 minutes in a game.
Yeah.
That's how much football you're watching.
In a game that takes hours.
In a game that takes 3 hours.
Yeah.
Everything else is cutaways,
yes.
Analysis, and commercials.
Yes. It's not a situation where the quarterback is dropping back and then suddenly they're cutting to Taylor Swift. You're getting the game. You're getting the game.
He could go look at Taylor Swift.
Yes. Look at her anticipation to see where this pass goes.
Yes. Yes. So, so I'm going to say this. It is, I think, the dumbest political controversy I can remember.
It's hard to come up with one that challenges it, man. It's really dumb.
I mean, just pure stupidity.
Yeah.
So, and look at us. We've talked, 10, 15 minutes about it.
Yeah.
And we did a little something on the show. You should check that out. Colin did a great job producing that, particularly the open on that. Definitely. Check that
thanks
out.
to editor Hunter Norris for his work on that.
Yes,
too.
yeah. Thanks that the Hunters did a really great job. Please, go check that out. So I think that closes the book on the Taylor Swift controversy for me, unless you want to continue to talk about it.
No, I think we've covered it. We'll see what stupidity rears its head the next week.
I mean, they're worried about, the last thing I'll say is they're worried about her endorsing Joe Biden. Like, why wouldn't she at this point? I mean, didn't she endorse him in 2020 too?
Yeah.
Or in 2020 as well? Like, why wouldn't she endorse him again now? I mean, you're just... whatever. You're making it really easy.
Yeah. I'm at a loss. Are we done? Should we say goodbye?
I think we're done. Last question for you. Blink 182 or Bruce Springsteen? Where are you going? Which concert are you going to?
I would be going to Springsteen. Is he still scheduled to come here, by the way? I know
think
they
so.
were rescheduled, but I forget where that is.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I've seen Bruce. Have not seen Blink 182, nor am I terribly likely to.
Look, y'all know I love the punk rock, but let's just say it's better live punk rock bands than Blink 182.
Have you seen Springsteen live?
Never have.
It's very good.
Got a very bitter story about the time I could have seen Springsteen on Broadway, but it didn't happen. For reasons I'd rather not discuss on the podcast.
Excellent. We'll take that off the air.
All right. Good night, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks. See you next week.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the Google Store, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. See you next time.